Good morning. Do you guys remember what you wanted to be when you grew up? When I was a kid, I wanted to be a scientist because when you're a kid, science is fun and interesting. And for my grade 6 science fair project, I created a survey to see whether people's favorite color correlates at all with their hair and eye color. And of course it doesn't. Even at 11 years old, I knew that was a stupid hypothesis. But I had to do something, and my attempts to build an electric motor had already failed. However, the teachers were so blown away by anything even resembling original research that I was chosen to go to the citywide science fair. One of the presentations at the City Science Fair was about the Voyager space probe, and they put up a picture on the screen of the planet Uranus that the probe had taken that looked like a tiny, blurry green circle. And I can still remember the astronomer telling us that when they saw that first image, people were so excited that they literally jumped up and down. And the reason I remember is because it was at that moment that I realized I didn't want to be a scientist. I couldn't even imagine how boring the rest of the job must be if that little blurry circle got people jumping out of their chairs with excitement. I still don't really know what I want to be, but now I don't worry about it that much. I think a better question is, what do I want to do? What you want to be implies some static end state at an undefined point in the future. Doing only ever happens in the present. If you're trying to be something, you could end up doing a lot of things that you don't want to do. Whereas it's much better, I think, to find something that you enjoy doing enough that all of the emails and meetings and other stuff that you have to do seems worthwhile. What I like to do is make people laugh and sing and feel like I'm supporting and being supported by a caring community. And whatever that means I will be, I am happy to be. And I think that's why we show up here every Sunday, to feel and sustain this community, and it doesn't matter what we do or be. I'm happy just to be here this morning with all of you.
Floods, wreaking havoc from the Gulf Coast to India. Smoke filling the air as wildfires burn up and down the West Coast. I can't tell you how many conversations I've had over the past weeks and months, and I know that many of you have as well, because some of them at least have been with me. Conversations heavy as the smoke-filled air. Adjectives like apocalyptic offered with a certain amount of wish it weren't so disbelief combined with a world-weary acknowledgement. It's come to this. And we may not know exactly how the science works, but we know that climate change probably has something to do with it, but also that somehow it's bigger than climate change, that our species' ecological disregard over the past 2 centuries is finally catching up with us. And it may be our friends and family fleeing the fires or floods this time, or it may not, but either way we can't help but hear, but say, but think, it's not usually like this. It wasn't like this when I was a kid. This was the worst in so many years. And so it was with those fragments of conversation on my mind, with a throat still itching from smoky skies, that I was visiting the Vancouver Aquarium on a Monday morning. And as Henry was dancing around the amphibians section, I was struck by a small sign on the wall. It was about the Vancouver Aquarium's work in partnership with aquariums and other organizations around the world to protect 500 species of frogs from extinction. The project's called the Amphibian Ark. Amphibians, I guess, are somewhat of the canary in the coal mine of what many scientists are worrying is the sixth mass extinction. You've heard some of these statistics, I'm sure. The picture that scientists are painting is bleak. Tens of thousands of species from around the globe, from a multitude of frogs to the great African elephant, are facing the possibility of extinction due to loss of habitat, climate change, other human-related conditions. And so in the face of the possibility of a sixth great extinction, this ancient ancestral image, this ark, has taken on significance for countless organizations working to preserve and protect life. You might have heard of the Frozen Ark, a database housed in 32 centers around the world of frozen DNA, attempting to preserve as many samples of species as possible. Seed banks are doing similar work. In fact, the Unitarian Service Committee of Canada, the USC, started out of World War II. Their projects have become almost entirely devoted to a Seeds for Survival program, which they say is working with agricultural communities around the world to preserve the agricultural biodiversity necessary to feeding a growing and changing planet. They're preserving seeds, the DNA of real life, not human-created. But in the face of apocalyptic possibilities, people around the world taking up the mantle of Noah, many using that very language of the ark to protect life through the flood that's upon us. And so I have to say, this Noah story, I think it's one that's fairly easy for us to dismiss, us rational Unitarians. One Unitarian kid who was first exposed to the story responded with a litany of questions. I don't think it would be unfamiliar to any of you who've told that story to a child for the first time. She said, first of all, how could 2 of every single type of animals fit on a boat? How could you survive with that much poop on a boat? What if the animals fought and ate each other? We're talking about predators and prey all mixed together. How did they have enough food and water for the humans and the animals for all of those days? How did Noah keep the birds on the ship when they're used to flying freely? And maybe most importantly, why did God harm all those humans and animals who hadn't done anything wrong? What did the dogs of the world, she asked, do to deserve being murdered? And in fact, I think it's that very incomprehensibility of the story, the very fact that it doesn't make any sort of coherent, logical sense that makes it a fascinating parable. And I wonder if we treat it more like a dream than a history lesson, what wisdom might be there. And in that ancient dream, I hear an echo of my own horrified why. We're not the first to see visions of a catastrophic future, not the first to be stunned by horrific tragedy. Reverend Jake Morrill, who's a Unitarian minister in Tennessee, recently reflected on a midrash about the Noah story. The midrash are the generations of rabbinic commentary on the old Jewish text, on the Torah. And Jake notes, one midrash says, while some animals ate in the 2nd hour of the night, others ate in the 3rd hour of the day, and that was sort of an example of kind of eating at all times of day and night. And so you know that in feeding them all, Noah and his family hardly tasted sleep through the whole storm and length of the flood. For month after month, the caregiving, the exhaustion, and the whole world soaked through. And I think of Houston, Jake says, and Mumbai and Niamey, the capital of Niger, all of them flooded this week, and Freetown in Sierra Leone still mucking up from the flood they had there. And in all those places, there are first responders tending to people and animals, even through their exhaustion when they haven't tasted sleep and so much has been ruined. And sometimes the first responders wear a uniform, and sometimes the responders are parents or cousins or a neighbor, all acting not only out of duty, but out of compassion, so that those in their care get just what it is they need, the right medicine, the right food, the right way to be heard. Jake goes on, in the story, even before things are anywhere near fully dry, and probably catching his breath from the round-the-clock animal care, Noah sends out a dove who comes back with an olive branch, and it's just a small thing, just a twig, but it means everything. That after all, ruination isn't how it all ends. That new life was already rising up even before they could see it or would have even dared hope. The world is ending, and somehow it's still worth working day and night to feed the animals, still worth following the impulse to care. The world is ending, and somehow it's still worth following the impulse to care. Eschatology is the theological word, the big fancy seminary term for wrestling with the question of the end times, the end of the world. Most world religions offer an eschatological vision, that is, a vision of the ultimate fate of the world, of the cosmos. In many traditions, it has some reference to the world to come. World to come, it's a translation of the Hebrew ha'olam haba, which in the Jewish Talmud is described like this: in the world to come, there is no eating, no drinking, no procreation, no business negotiations, no jealousy, no hatred, and no competition. Rather, the righteous sit with crowns upon their head, enjoying the splendor of divine presence. In Hinduism, the world to come is imagined as the golden age of Satya Yuga, described in the Mahabharata like this: there were no poor and no rich. There was no need to labor, because all that men required was obtained by the power of will. The chief virtue was the abandonment of all worldly desires. The Krita Yuga, is another name for that golden age, was without disease. There was no lessening with the years. There was no hatred or vanity or evil thought. No sorrow, no fear. All humankind could attain to supreme blessedness. So there they are, the righteous with their crowns, all humankind in supreme blessedness. And this idea of the world to come, perfect, an unattainable paradise. So prevalent in so many cultures, I'm sure that you've had an image of it. I guess that for most of us, that image comes most directly from Christianity's idea of a kingdom of heaven, the kingdom of God. So there's two distinct features to most imaginings of the world to come. First, that it's another world, not this world. It's in another plane of existence. It's not for this lifetime. And then the second is it's for some and not for others. Who is in and out of the world to come is a subject of long-standing debate in almost every theological tradition. But luckily for us, our universalist ancestors have already settled the matter quite clearly. Reverend Mark Morrison Reed, who served many years as co-minister with his wife Donna at First Unitarian in Toronto, Talks about an old universalist eschatological image that the last unrepenting sinner being dragged, kicking and screaming into heaven, unable to resist the power and love of the Almighty. Universalism was called the gospel of God's success. And while most of us today don't think of it in terms of an anthropomorphic God and heaven as a literal place, this idea of the incredible strength of a universal and powerful love. A circle of care and compassion that leaves no one out. This is still central to our faith. Or put another way, the Universalist minister Gordon McKeeman quipped, Universalists believe that all of us are going to end up together in heaven, so we might as well learn how to get along with each other now. This isn't an esoteric universalism, but a practical one that says all of us earthlings ultimately share a common fate. And so we are called to a common purpose. Over the past several decades, scientists have empirically demonstrated this truth with greater and greater clarity. Interconnectedness is not simply ancient spiritual wisdom, it is awe-inspiring scientific fact, as Jim Stevenson told us about a few weeks ago, if you were here for that. These universalist ideas, they were an eschatological challenge to traditional Christian eschatology of otherworldly kingdom of God, reserved for a select few. Right? Then they were actually part of a broader movement throughout liberal Christianity, which came to be called social gospel Christianity. The eschatology, the end times idea of social gospel Christianity says that it's humans' job to bring about the kingdom of heaven here on earth. The kingdom of heaven isn't going to be something else otherworldly. It's going to be here on earth, and it's our job to make it so. And I think that in many ways our tradition's understanding of the call to social justice, our emphasis on the need to care for this world and make it more equitable, it comes from this social gospel understanding of eschatology. But while social gospel eschatology offers an important corrective, it still held up and holds up this vision of a perfect world to come. And in the words of the Unitarian Universalist theologian Rebecca Parker, the hoped-for future perpetually condemns the present. The failure of the world to conform to God's vision of justice and abundance is laid at humanity's feet. We have not yet worked smart enough, been well organized enough, convinced enough people, or corrected the flaws in our approach. We're always falling short in this social gospel eschatology. So Parker offers instead a radically realized eschatology. Radically realized. She says that it begins with affirming that we are already standing on holy ground. This earth, she writes, and none other, is a garden of beauty, a place of life. Neglecting it for some other imagined better place will be a self-fulfilling prophecy. It will make the earth a wasteland. There is no land promised to any of us other than the land already given, the world already here. Radically realized eschatology says the flood, it's part of this paradise. It says the exhausting work of caring for those animals 24/7, that's part of paradise too. It says firefighters putting their lives on the line to save homes and communities, that's an appropriate ethical response to living in the beauty of this world. It says the only paradise that is to be found is the one that is already here and now. And this paradise contains suffering and struggle right alongside beauty and delight. Radically realized eschatology. It's about a world to come that is already here and now. This morning, my spouse and co-minister, Reverend Emily, along with members of our community and many others, are participating in that walk for reconciliation. I understand it's the second such walk, organized across the country as a demonstration of solidarity in reconciling with First Nations communities in the work that is ultimately mostly white folks' work to reconcile with a tragic past. Reconciliation is itself, I think, an eschatological vision. To work for reconciliation, to say that reconciliation is possible, is a hopeful theological stance. It says that however bad things have been and things are, hope is not lost, all is not lost. Even though the harm has been atrocious, hope for healing and wholeness remains. Reconciliation doesn't say the past will be erased and replaced with a perfect future, but simply that amends and some kind of repair are possible. I realized preparing today that I don't know much at all about First Nations eschatology. I have some vague images from childhood stories and songs, but I know even what I might have learned about the Miwok or Ohlone, the peoples of Northern California where I grew up, or Navajo and Lakota and Cherokee, who are most often talked about in the United States. Even if I know some vague image or fragment of their eschatological beliefs, it probably tells me nothing about the Musqueam or Squamish or Tsleil-Waututh peoples here. And I think it's also even problematic to try and understand indigenous religion through my seminary-trained lens of systematic theology, to call it eschatology. And I recognize that my falling short is a part of this world to come that already is too. Honoring the challenge and the struggle alongside the hope and the beauty. Social gospel eschatology tells us, wisely so, that it is our work to make reconciliation happen for the future. There is truth here. It is our hands that will make justice. And radically realized eschatology reminds us that there will be no perfect reconciled moment. The history of the world will always include the cultural genocide of residential schools and murdered languages, the full genocide of tribes and peoples across North America. Radically realized eschatology reminds us that the world to come includes struggle too. And so that world is here and now, and the work of reconciliation is a part of our paradise. As Emily put it last week, in the struggle lies the joy. Final story from Rebecca Parker. She tells of a bus ride through the Ansel Adams wilderness in the Sierra Nevadas. She's getting to know her seatmate, the friend of a family member. He said that he had been raised Catholic, she writes, and that his wife was the daughter of a Methodist minister. Church was important to him. I can't believe all the doctrines, he said. I never was comfortable with the bloody crucifix hanging over the altar. I couldn't understand why we would be worshiping it, but I learned a way of life from the church that I have not rejected. What is that way of life? Rebecca asked. Oh, it's simple, he said. Love your neighbor as yourself. Try to help, not harm. Do what you can to make a difference. He went on, we do foster care for kids. He said it was heartbreaking to see some of the violence, abuse, and deprivation these children have experienced. But he and his wife welcomed them into their home and did what they could. Not even love can repair the damage sometimes, he said. He asked what book topic Rebecca was working on, and she answered, Paradise. Paradise, he mused, and looked out the window of the bus for a few moments at the bright sky, the deep green pine forests, the alpine meadows coming into view, and rising above them, the sharp peaks of the minarets. Do you mean paradise like where we are right now? Yes, she said, like where we are right now. They both gazed out the window for a few minutes, breathing in the pungent fresh air. This is enough, he said. You know that because you help kids, she said. A cloud of thoughtfulness passed over his face. Yes, he replied, that's right. She ends the story with this reflection. We come to know this world as paradise when our hearts and souls are reborn through the arduous and tender task of living rightly with one another in the earth. Generosity and mutual care are the pathways into knowing that paradise is here and now. This way of living is not utopian. It does not spring from the imagination of a better world, but from a profound embrace of this world. It brings hope home to today, to this moment, and its possibilities for faithful love. And that line echoes for me, not even love can repair the damage sometimes. And yet this friend and his wife still show up with their love. Homes and lives and souls cannot always be repaired, not even with the greatest love, yet the act of seeing and loving these broken places still matters. Not to make them better for tomorrow, but for the beauty of loving the world even in its brokenness, perhaps especially in its brokenness today. On Wednesday evening began the High Holy Days of the Jewish calendar. Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year, I mentioned this last year, begins with a bodily reminder of paradise. The evening that Rosh Hashanah begins starts for the first moment of the new year with eating apples dipped in honey. The sweetness and zest calling the senses to fall back in love with this world. I invite you to just recall those sweet tastes, if you can, in your mouth for a moment of apples and honey. May we hear this call to fall in love with the world again and again. Fall in love with this here and now, where we are in a process of reconciliation with the indigenous people on whose land we sit. This here and now, where we are building arks for frogs and seeds to survive another millennia. This here and now, where we are caring for children, both our own and others who do not have homes or families. This here and now, where we are preparing a new generation to live more gently on the planet. This here and now, where we are bringing practices of restorative justice into schools. May we fall in love with this world again and again. Fall in love with this here and now, in its beauty and its brokenness. May that be so.